Hey everyone, Enrique here. Welcome to another review. Let's continue my personal trilogy that I created for myself, or at the very least, I associate with, in this case, the Marvel Knight trilogy, by talking about a character who just recently got his own Marvel presentation special. In this case, I'm of course talking about Frank Castle, aka The Punisher, coming back once again, played by John Bernthal in a special called The Punisher One Last Kill. This was something that a lot of us were waiting for and all eager to see, especially considering the fact that John Bernthal was coming back as arguably the best Punisher out of all of them. Don't get me wrong, guys like Thomas Jane and Ray Winston, and to a certain degree, Dolph Lundgren, were pretty good on their own. But this was the first time that we saw John Bernthal playing an iconic character from pretty much the Marvel Comics, because Frank Castle has always been different from all the superheroes and even villains that we have seen over the years. Starting out as, of course, a Spider-Man villain, then turning out to be an anti-hero, the history of Frank Castle has been messy, tragic, and bloody at the same time. But this is something that people enjoy. In a world full of superheroes, aliens, and all sorts of mutants, we see a guy like Frank Castle punishing all those criminals who are still running loose, not only in New York City, but all around other countries in pretty much the world. And we have seen John Burton playing the Punisher for almost 10 years. Now, of course, there was a sabbatical that unfortunately all the Netflix shows were canceled, so we couldn't see him as the Punisher anymore until right now. After season one of Daredevil Born Again, this was the time for us to see Frank Castle back in his entire uniform and skull in his chest, delivering punishment and death to all the criminals. No matter where they from, what kind of things they did, Frank Castle is going to be there. So now let's focus our attention into this special. So there have been mixed reactions towards the presentation that they created. Some love it, some hate it. Some feel that it is very violent, others feel that it wasn't violent enough. Others feel like it has a story that not many people will enjoy, but others will argue that it's still well acted and greatly performed by the actor itself. So, we're going to explore all that in a moment. But first, I think it's important for me to say that I need to bring some of the history of Frank Castle, especially learning what we know now after seasons one and two of The Punisher, season two of Daredevil from the Netflix show, and right now. I'm trying to bring a lot of context here so you are not loose on what happened. And besides, I'm pretty sure that this is going to be longer than, the special itself. But I'm not here to criticize that yet, so let's talk about a little bit of history of Frank Castle. Frank Castle, aka the Punisher, started out as your typical war veteran who's fighting in Afghanistan and Kandahar, doing a lot of missions for the US government. A soldier who pretty much is loyal to his unit decides one day to leave, and after a mission that went horribly wrong in Kandahar, he decides to leave the military life behind him and just spend his life with his wife Maria and his two kids Lisa and Frank Castle Jr. Unfortunately, due to devious circumstances, Frank Castle and his family were all gunned down in a park where they were playing and in a carousel where a lot of gangs from different places starting to shoot at each other, cutting Frank somehow survived, and after learning what happened, he decided to put all his effort, all his military years and skills to the fullest of his abilities to track down and kill the people responsible for it. He stopped being Frank Castle that day and instead became the Grim Reaper of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. he became the Punisher. Now, if you haven't seen all the shows that led up to this moment, allow me to break it down a little bit quick. But yeah, Frank Castle's entire family's death, it was due to circumstances that led him from Kandahar. You see, he was involved in an operation called Cerberus, which was created by William Rawlins, aka Agent Orange, alongside Major Schoonover, who had the code name Blacksmith and was one of the leaders of Frank's unit, decided to utilize him as well as the other soldiers right there to not only do operations outside of CIA operations, which means it wasn't sanctioned, to smuggle weapons and drugs in order to gain money for the people who are enriching themselves with. In this case, Schoonover and Rollins, using all those political tactics and as well as using the soldiers for their own means to an end. They had help, of course, with the help of FBI agent Carson Wolf, as well as Major Maureen Bennett, and one of Frank's best friends, Billy Russo. Still, Billy Russo is a different character and a different version from the comics, but I'm gonna get into that in a moment. But needless to say, Billy was Frank's best friend and arguably the uncle of his family for his kids, and he betrayed him. Frank didn't know it at the time. He started to find out a little bit about what happened to him, tracking down all the people that he killed, from the Irish, from the cartels to the Dogs of Hell, and of course the people in charge, which are Russo, Rollins, Schoonover, Wolf, and Bennett. And all that due to those negligent actions, it led to the creation of Frank as this vigilante. Of course, he needed help from other people. In this case, he needed help from David Liverman, aka Micro. This was the first role that Evan Moss Backhart ever played in an MCU story, and arguably, this is still my favorite character. I love him as the Thing, and you can check my review of the Fantastic Four if you want to check that out. But yeah, Evan as Micro was perfect because the chemistry between him and John Berto was great. But regardless, yeah, after finding out what happened to his family, Frank made the decision to get every single one of them. He killed Schoonover. He killed Maury Bennett. Well, actually, no. That was Major Rollins and Billy Russo. But of course, he also killed Carson Wolf. He killed Agent Orange, which means he killed Rollins. And he was about to kill his best friend Billy Russo for betraying him, but of course, starting to his face. Regardless, he made the decision that day to actually be the Punisher because he believed that's who he was all along. But yeah, due to those circumstances, and after season 2, where he had to save a girl from some enemies and corrupted people, he decided to actually employ his skills. But unfortunately, he had to find out that his best friend Billy Russo was still around, and in this case, very conscious. Due to circumstances that I'm not going to get into it, he managed to kill Billy Russo, putting an end to his story. Then afterwards, we see him in season 1, where he's tracking down Kingpin and the people who are using his skull logo for their own means, which of course we know is Glenn Powell, and of course, what was the other name? Cole North, sorry. I almost forgot his name. But yeah, afterwards he was in prison, but then he escaped, and now we see him in this special. So, if you want to know why he wasn't in season 2, it's because John Berto was busy doing this special for the fans of The Punisher. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So, what is the plot of this special? Well, the plot starts out by seeing Frank almost at the end of his sanity, as we see him collapsing in his own mind, figuring out why he's still doing this, because he destroyed every single member of the people who took down his family, having nightmares that he's still alive while all the people aren't, like in this case his wife, his kids, and he's getting people who has been close to, like of course Curtis, and he doesn't see the point of being a Punisher anymore, and he's ready to end it all until, believe it or not, the most unexpected force came to help him realize why he's still fighting. In this case, Manucci. Manucci was one of the members of the Nucci family in which Frank had a hand of killing. He killed a lot of the members, including Ma's son, who was accused of horrific actions. But she made the decision to make Frank's life a living hell, or at the very least kill him by paying every single person on the street a little ility to get to him, killing almost everybody and causing chaos. Inadvertently, this is the motivation that Frank needs in order to still being alive and keep punishing those who deserve. And that is pretty much the plot of this special. We see a lot of things, but in short amount of time, we only focus on Frank, his state of mind, and why he's still doing what he does. And that is one of the centers of this special. It's not trying to be like a big epic storyline because we already seen Frank's in other storylines before, but it's showing like the core concept of why does the Punisher exist? Why does Frank still keep doing this? Why is he still alive knowing that his wife and kids are never going to return no matter how many people he kills? And that is what the special is trying to do. It's trying to dissect the psyche of Frank Castle, make him confront his past, and see if there is any exit or if there is a silver lining. Even though he will never get a reward, he will never have something of a piece of life. But why is he still doing this? That's what the special is trying to answer. So yeah, this is pretty much psychological based, similar in some respects to the 2004 Punisher movie with Thomas Jane, but that movie had a little bit more action, and this one has action, but it has a more psychological depth to Frank. And I'm gonna get into the actor a little bit later. But now, let's talk about the principal players in this game. So let's start with Manucci, played by Judy Light. Now, this is an actress that we have seen before in other media. In this case, those who watch the 80s probably know her best in her role in Who's the Boss. Now, I haven't seen Who's the Boss. I haven't watched that show, but I hear that it's pretty funny. So, in many respects, this actress is pretty much departing from comedy to a very dramatic performance. So, Manucci, as I said before, is part of the Nucci family, all killed by Frank Castle. And this is the moment where she decides, even in wheelchairs and being almost disabled or not being able to walk on her own again, to make her life a living hell to Frank Castle. Basically, she wants revenge against Frank for what he did to her entire family, including her son. This is a character that we have seen in the comics before. Ironically, it was created by Gareth Ennis, who was the same creator of the Boys comic. Now, I said before and I said again that I'm not a fan of the Boys, but I have to say that he created interesting characters in the Punisher series, Manucci being one of them. A woman whose extremities and entire body were broken down by Frank Castle in more ways than one. She was a very messed up lady, bent in revenge against Frank for what he did to her. And that is something that we see here. Manucci has her extremities still, but she wants to make the life of Frank Castle a living hell. She wants to get rid of him as a form of revenge for all the people that she lost. In this case, her son and all his brothers and family members in the Nucci family. And it's a small performance, but it's still very intimidating and very well acted by Judy Light. I have to say that she comes across a little bit sympathetic, but also unhinged at the same time. So I deeply appreciated that. And I hope to see her in more specials and to see her back as Manucci. I really want to see her story unfold. Now let's talk about the people who Frank lost. In this case, his entire family. Maria, Lisa, and Frank Castle Jr. All played by different actors. In this case, we see Addie Bernthal, who is the daughter of John Burkle, the man behind The Punisher, playing, ironically, Lisa Castle, as well as seeing Eduardo Campirano as Frank Castle Jr. It's important to note that these two kids are different from the ones that we've seen in the Netflix series of The Punisher. Of course, the Castle family has been recasted almost 3 times in this case. The first time we saw a completely different type of actors in season 2 of Daredevil. But when we get to the Punisher series, we see other 2 kids playing Frank Castle's kids. Now it's very different, but they still do very well in their short amount of times, especially Addie, who has a more prominent role of being in more of the flashbacks of Frank Castle's psyche and being like almost the voice of conscience for Frank. So I deeply appreciated that, and it's good to see that there was a proxy little girl similar to Frank's daughter that motivates him to be back in the game. Another person that I need to highlight is Maria Castle, who's played once again by Kelly Barrett. Now, Kelly already appeared before in season 1 of Daredevil. We saw her being Frank Castle's wife, being loving and very caring. Here we saw her the same, but it's very short and it's pretty much for the flashbacks. But I deeply appreciate that she came back for this special, especially it not only gives us a little bit of continuity with the original series, but also brings to heart why Frank Castle couldn't just let go, why he had to still be going, and how the image of his wife almost haunts him. And that is something that Frank Castle struggles with. But it's good to see that Kelly came back for this, even if it's for a short time for flashbacks. But it still shows that she's still Frank's little angel, the one woman that tamed the beast inside him. Other people that we see in this special that are most of the time used as hallucinations are, of course, Curtis Hoyle and Karen Page. Now, Curtis Hoyle, played once again by Jason R. Moore, is like the voice of Frank saying that you have to give up. Like, why are you still fighting? Why are you still doing this? Why do you think that you deserve redemption? Do you think you deserve redemption? Now, Curtis, if you've seen in the series, you saw that he was like the voice of reason for Frank. The one man who stood by him despite everything that Frank has done. All the killing, all the massacre. Curtis is like that best friend that you want to be around, despite the fact that he has suffered his own share of heartbreak and hard feelings. But in this case, he's used more as a haunting image for Frank, and due to his time in the military. And that is something that Frank struggles with. Curtis, in this case, becomes like the little devil inside him, despite the fact that we don't know if Curtis is still alive. I mean, for as far as we know, he's still around, and he was alive at the end of the series. So we don't know if he's still alive, if it's just in his head, maybe he learned that Curtis died. I don't know. All I know is that Curtis is used in a more haunting way in this special. Someone who's used a little bit different is Karen Page, once again played by Deborah Ann Wolf. Now, we all saw her in Daredevil Season 2, Daredevil Born Again Season 2, as almost falling into the same mentality that Frank had of killing the criminals, killing the bad guys, no matter the consequences. Karen started to develop the same mentality that Frank did in order to get rid of all the enemies. And that was something that struggled with with Matt and her relationship. That is something that Karen, and let's be honest, Karen has not got over that. I'm pretty sure that this is something that we're going to see continue in season 3. But in this special, like I said, she's just used as an hallucination. But it's important to mention that she's still like the voice of reason as well. Like she's the angel into his shoulder that the Punisher is the devil on Frank's shoulder. That is something that they use. She's still used as a form of haunting for Frank, his mental state, but deep down, she still cares for him. I mean, his mentality is saying, yeah, Karen is still someone who cares about you. And it's not lost to me that the hoodie that she wears in this moment, in this scene, is the one that Maria is using in a flashback in this special. It pretty much shows us that Frank has romantic feelings for Karen, and the creators and the showrunners have said that they want to continue exploring this triangle of love between Matt, Karen, and Frank Castle. And this one is pretty much evidence of that mentality. But it shows that no matter what happened, Karen somehow, some way, still has feelings for Frank. And Frank knows that. He understands that. And he knows that Karen is the most precious thing that he has ever had. And that is something that he will fight to the death of it. And that is something that becomes a motivating factor for Frank in this special. But now, let's talk about John Burtell as Frank Castle, aka the Punisher. So, as I said, this special is all about Frank, all about his mental state, all about his guilt and his wish, his death wish, because he just can't take it anymore. And this is something that touches a lot of sensitive subjects, especially those soldiers who have lost their sanity during wars and in other battles. And this one shows us that Frank is ready to end it all, but he still finds something to keep fighting for. And that is special. And John Burtell, let me just say this, is very good in this special. Not good, perfect. Because it's one thing to play a very cold individual who kills a lot of bad guys. It's another thing to see the mentality of that person and how it's slowly but surely breaking down around him. But although in the case of Frank, it's almost breaking down very rapidly. Regardless, he still shows us a great performance, shows us why Frank is the way he is, why he believes that he has to continue despite all the odds that he had in his life. And this shows us not only his mental state but also his ability to get the bad guys dead faster. You can say, "Oh my God, I have nothing to say. I don't have a quote for that." But you can say it faster. You can say season 3 of Daredevil. Let's put it like that. But yeah, Frank Castle as the Punisher not only brings a lot of the drama and heavy weight of the character, but also all the cool action that we like to see on Frank. And that is something that is the biggest strength of this special, in my opinion. Now let's talk about action sequences. This, as many people have compared it to, is like the raid in the MCU. As we see Frank Castle going through buildings and rooms in order to get to the ground, all in order to get to Monucci, kill all the subordinates and bounty hunters who are after Frank. And let me tell you, it's very violent and gruesome. Although I would have wished they were allowed to be more violent. I'm not gonna say that I want it to be like the boys, because the boys, I think how can I say this? They have made the gore and the action very cartoony and almost unrealistic. You almost feel unsensitized by it. But here it feels more different. It just needed to be more gruesome and more realistic, because if you're being attacked by many people in one building and in one street, you need to be more allowed to show more gore and more, let's say, more blood. We get a lot of blood. In fact, we get probably one of the best action sequences of all time. It's not room hallway like in Daredevil, but it's still pretty close. And it's good to see that the stunts are all performed by John Bronto. Now, he has stunt doubles, of course, but he still are portrayed by him as well because he put his passion. He was the executive producer for the special, mind you, and he knew that he needed to get the character to meet and gritty. He needed to be as realistic as possible. He set himself on fire in one scene in order to make the shot look good and work. That is the level of commitment. I heard a lot of people who are criticizing was one scene in which he falls into the ground, in which they said that it was all computer generated. But honestly, that's one scene. If you look at it entirely, it still looks pretty cool and kick ass. Now, of course, there's something that I do need to criticize, and that is the time. It should have been longer. If you ask me, I believe that this special needed to be like 1 hour and a half. I know it's like a long movie, but I want Frank Castle to be more action, more scenes of, him killing bad guys, because we get a little, but we need to see more. And I would like to see Frank Castle utilize more weapons and more arsenal that he has acquired over the years. Hell, we wanted to see in the new logo that he has, in the new skull logo that he created for himself, but we don't see that until the very end, which is at the end of the special. And we need to see more of Frank Castle being Frank Castle as the Punisher. We want to see more Punisher. So if this is leading to season 3 of appearing in that and be able to do more violent stuff, then please let us see that. Let us see Frank Castle be more Punisher. More Punisher and more time, please. This is my only gripe with this special. And that is something that we need to see in later specials. Hopefully, it will start the Marvel special once again. But now let's talk about something that I always wanted to talk about in regards to the character. And that is my views on what kind of knight is the Punisher. And in my opinion, he is the knight of punishment and vengeance. I said in my video of Daredevil Born Again Season 2 that Matt Murdock, as Daredevil, he was the knight of law and justice. You can also say that he was the knight of grace in retribution, but I associated him more with law and justice. And in here, it's pretty obvious that Frank is the knight of punishment and vengeance. And that is something that I really enjoyed, because there's one thing to see Daredevil be a guy who respects the law but still puts in uniform in order to fight the bad guys and be able to spare them no matter what. But Frank Castle is a different type of cat. It's what makes it interesting, his complex psychological state, his mentality about killing bad guys, his views on the world, his views on other people, how he struggles sometimes with his own nature, but he still manages to be under control and still be on the service for the people. Because Frank Castle doesn't do this just for his own sanity, for his own sake. He also does this for the people, for the men and women he cares about. And that is something that we see in this special. There is one scene in particular in which we see now why Frank is the way he is and why he keeps fighting. That's why, even though I'm not in favor of killing bad guys, I always believe that the guys should be spared. I make an exception with Frank because he wasn't exactly like Matt or even Spider-Man. He was a guy who lost everything in the most violent way. I mean, with Matt and Spidey, they lost the loved ones, yes, and in violent ways, but it's always in a more subtle way, in a more dramatic but also self-contained way. But here, it was pretty much an all-out war. And besides, Matt and Spidey and Peter have better upbringings than Frank Castle ever had. And this one is no exception. If you join the army to kill people, then you can expect this guy to, if he ever lost his family, to be the same way. Now, that is why I consider him a knight. Because while other people are ready to not break the rules and just be as sane as possible, Frank just is the kind of guy who does things that nobody else can do. He said it himself. He's the kind of guy who kills other people for the sake of peace, for the sake of stopping them, to keep New York safe, and in other parts as well. And that's what makes him the guy who is well suited to protect New York City as well, especially in crime levels who are pretty much disturbing for any other superhero to confront. Even for Jessica Jones, who has suffered the most, in my opinion. But yeah, that's who Frank Castle is. He's the Knight of Punishment and Vengeance, and he's ready to throw on his life for the sake of stopping any more people for causing more damage and more loss that he suffered too. So yeah, I really enjoy this special, and that's one of my views on Frank Castle. As a whole, the special might not be perfect, and like I said, it could have used more time, but it's still good to see the psychological study of Frank Castle, as well as see him in action, protecting people but also killing bad guys left and right. There's a reason I call him the Grim Reaper of the MCU, but that is because, unlike Mistress of Death, who is just there to welcome people into the afterlife, Frank Castle is just there to make sure that everyone, every bad guy, every criminal, every person who is a creep or a monster suffers a violent death. And that's what makes him so very dangerous but also interesting. He's the Grim Reaper of the MCU because he doesn't give mercy to all those criminals. But he does care about people, and that's what Frank Castle is. That's who the Punisher is meant to be. Not just as an agent of vengeance, but also as a knight of punishment. So, if you're curious or if you're a big Punisher fan, then you will probably like this special as well. If you're not, then I suggest you go to seasons 1 and 2. You might find something enjoyable before the Netflix cancellations. But yeah, I definitely recommend this one, if not to help us appreciate also Frank Castle's mentality, but the people who suffer it. And that is something very important. So I hope you guys enjoyed my review. I hope you guys can give comments on what you think about this special. What do you think about One Last Kill? Let me know in the comment section below. Next week, I'm going to talk about another Marvel character, but from a different streaming service. And it's played by a pretty freaking character. Or in this case, a freaky actor. Regardless, I've been Enrique, and I'll see you next time. Peace.